Okay, we've got the 1512 notes in the same day I did the 1511 notes, so I did wait until the last day of the patch to do the 1511 notes, but I had to go through them anyways for myself, so that's okay. This is an absolutely massive patch. We have like at least 20 champion changes. It looks like they're changing systems around Otacon and Dragon, which could be really big for the game potentially, depending on what they do. So this could be a quite an interesting patch that could really change a whole lot and really shake things up. I am a little bit unsurprised, though, that this is a gigantic patch because people have been saying that things were coming. And maybe this isn't even it. Maybe this is just the start. But, there's definitely some people saying things that are coming. Like a bunch of creators went to meet at Riot and discussed a lot of changes that they wanted to see in the game. Kind of the fact that the game is stale and stagnating right now. Every time there's a new season, they release these amazing sweeping changes that really shake up the game. And this year has felt really underwhelming because while they added Otacon, it ended up being pretty underwhelming because they just pushed Baron spawn timer back as a result. So while it's a new neutral objective, it doesn't change what champions are picked because of it. It's just something to take instead of Baron in that 20 to 25 minute slot. And since they pushed Baron back, it didn't really add like a, trade this for this type of dynamic. So it just didn't add a whole lot. And then I think this is a really big thing. Otacon just gives you XP and adaptive force. And I think that that's a really boring way to introduce a neutral objective into the game. Because neutral objectives that just give you stats or just give you gold don't feel as interesting as like when they added Rift Herald or the effect that you get from Baron or the effect that you get from Elder Dragon. There are these very unique, or even like Soul, right? The effects that you get from Soul, even though dragons are mostly stats. These systems give you some cool, like just completely game-changing new mechanics in the game, whereas Otacon doesn't do that. Now we can get into, so that was for Noxus. They also added Feats of Strength, and Feats of Strength was kind of a cool concept, but of course poorly executed because it wasn't worth it to buy boots as much as people thought it was OP in the beginning. It was never worth it to buy boots for like a very long time until they recently, dramatically reduced the cost from like 750 to 500. And even then, sometimes it's still better to wait a while to buy them. Certain boots aren't that amazing, but it's definitely more worth it now than it was before. So by the time they got Feats of Strength figured out and balanced, and they figured out what was going on with Otacon, because Otacon had some major balance issues as well, it was time for the second, split, or they're calling it a season. It was time for the Ionia season. So they're ready for the Ionia season, and they don't change anything. Right, the only thing that they changed about the Ionia season was they added a little extra effect to Otacon where, if you get that takedown, there's like that field around it that, there's like a little slowing effect type thing. So other than that, which is barely noticeable, there was barely anything changed. In fact, maybe this, was never planned on being the case, but I almost feel like Otacon was something that didn't really have to do with, felt more like Noxus to me. Feats of Strength and Otacon felt like they were supposed to be there for the Noxus split and then not be there at all for the Ionia split, and the Ionia split would be something completely different. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that this was their intention, and obviously like the lore is that Ionia and Noxus fought, so maybe that's what's supposed to be going on, is just a continuation of the same thing. But it felt weird to me. I kind of expected them to replace these things with something else. And it felt like, because I expected that the only reason why they kept them is because it took them so long to get the balance right on Otacon and Feats of Strength that if they were to remove them right once they finally got them balanced or something, that would really suck. And we just move into a state where here's another new thing that's unbalanced. And it would feel like we're constantly trying to finish balancing the thing before the split is over. So I get that, but it's been a pretty underwhelming and boring split. Feats of Strength and Otacon just really didn't change the meta or what champions are played at all. And so it's been kind of stale. right? So let's see what they've got for us in this patch. Nerfs to a lot of champions. Ari, don't think needed nerfed. Azir, don't think needed nerf, but I guess this is targeted at pro. Oh, Ari's targeted at pro too. Fair enough. Gwen, yeah, I mean, Gwen's always been quite a decent champion. Did it need nerfed? I mean, we'll see what the nerf is, right? Anyways, let's just read through it. Ahri, Azir, Gwen, Kalista, Nico, Rumble, Senna, Shen, Talia, Varus, Yorick. Really glad to see Senna and Shen getting hit. Those champions were ones that I just pointed out earlier today. I wish they would have nerfed in the last patch. So that's good to see. And then they're buffing Aatrox, Aphelios, Aurora, Bard, Belveth, Garen, Jax, LeBlanc, Lee Sin, Mordekaiser, Nidalee, Samira, Twisted Fate, and Zeri. Seems good. And they're adjusting Rammus and Vi. Didn't they just nerf Aatrox for no reason on the patch I read earlier today? Anyways, it's fine. But other than that, seems pretty good. And then obviously we'll see what the changes are to Otacon and Dragon, and then they're changing Grasp. Okay, so let's get into it. Hall of Legends. So they started this last year, I think, with the Faker thing. Every year they're going to induct a pro player into the Hall of Legends to honor their achievements. Okay. They did Uzi. So there's going to be a really expensive Uzi Vayne skin. Is this why that, this could be why they're not releasing as many skins per patch I'm always complaining about? Doesn't make sense to me. Maybe because of these super expensive skins that they're working on, like the Ahri one, the Vayne one. Maybe they have like a good part of the skin team is just dedicated to working on these like exalted skins that are coming out every once in a while, or like these I don't even know what these ones are called, but like the super expensive ones for like Faker and Uzi and stuff like that. Maybe that's why the skin team's not pumping out as many as you would expect. I mean, obviously, if they're doing that, that still means that they're understaffed or whatever. But interesting. Okay, Battle Pass improvements. We've been looking a lot at how all of you progress through the Battle Pass over the course of each season. We want to make sure it feels good and respects the time each of you invests in League. Whether you play 4 hours a day or 4 hours a week, we want to reward the time you dedicate to playing. Spirit of this, we'll be introducing some changes to improve how Battle Pass XP can be acquired in Act 2. Champion Mastery Battle Pass XP. Starting with Champion Mastery, we'll be moving Mastery Set XP to a mission instead of tying it to Mastery Set champions. I have no idea what that means or what that is. Under this new system, you'll be able to obtain the full 2,500 Battle Pass XP. Is this what this even stands for? BXP. I don't know. With champions of your choice instead of the ones offered by Mastery Sets. Okay. I don't pay any attention to this. I got to be honest with you. When we originally introduced Mastery Sets, our intention was for them to be a way for you to find a new main or two based on the personalized recommendations it provided, gaining some Battle Pass XP along the way. Now that it's been live for a while, we've looked at how players engage with these missions. The completion rates we're seeing aren't quite hitting our expectations, nor are they increasing different champions played, so we're making the call to remove Mastery Sets in patch 15.13. That's the next one. That said, we'll keep this learning in mind as we continue to improve the Mastery system in the future. Well, it's gone before I even knew what it was. That's a classic. Catch-up missions. That's kind of cool. We're introducing some changes to how the weekly missions will work so that battle passes feel better in terms of progression and how often you're able to complete them. Starting in patch 15.13, again, that's the next patch, not this one, instead of weekly missions lasting for 7 days, weekly missions will stick around for 21 days. This means that every week you'll get a new set of missions and you'll have multiple weeks to complete them. That's great for people who don't play frequently or like take a vacation and miss out on a battle pass. That seems like a good idea. It's no downside to this as well, because if people take a break and even want to like buy the battle pass for the other rewards, like, you know, they can get away with doing that even if they didn't have time to play the entire thing. So, you know, that's just a win-win, because it's nicer for players to be able to do it according to their own schedule, and it's nicer for Riot to incentivize people to buy it even if they miss part of it. Currently, there's no catch-up method that exists for players through the battle pass. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, seems good. There's a Your Shop returning. Aatrox. Our goal was for Aatrox changes to be power neutral. Good one. But he ended up a bit worse off than anticipated, so we're back this patch to follow up with some small buffs that should keep him happy. Passive, Deathbringer stance, healing ratio versus champions 80 to 100%. Isn't that just an undo of what they did before? No. I forget. No. This is different. Healing ratio versus minions 20 to 25%. I'd really need to look at the changes from last patch to remember, you know, like given last patch and this patch where we're at with power level. I think he's still maybe nerfed, because wasn't the big thing that they took a lot of max HP damage away from like his passive or something like that? I don't know. So, but there's too many champions. It's too big of a patch, so I'm not going to go do that. But so, you know, they're giving him a little bit of power back here with some healing, and then his E, which they didn't change. So they're not just like undoing the changes or anything like that. This is champion damage healing ratio 16% to 16% to 0.9 per 100 bonus HP to 1.1 per 100 bonus HP. So they're giving him more healing, but they still took away the damage and stuff like that. That, you know, so they made his passive, I believe, do a lot less percent max HP damage on the last patch, and they made his W do physical damage instead of magic damage, which means it does less because you're itemizing armor against him, and champions in general have more armor than magic resists, so it does less damage. Let's see. Ahri E charm duration decreased with rank. R cooldown increased. So it's getting 10 seconds on the ult at rank 1, then 5 at rank 2, and then none at rank 3. That shouldn't matter a whole lot. E charm duration 1.2 to 2 to 1.2 to 1.8. I just don't see, like, even for pro play, I just don't see how this moves the needle. So the reason why the ult change is not that big of a deal is because, especially in pro play, you're not just ulting on cooldown as Ahri. You're holding that in case you need it defensively, or you're using it when you're going in for like a committed team fight. You're not just randomly popping this where, you know, in a pro game, 5 seconds on Ahri ult cooldown is rarely ever going to make a difference, because you're going to be playing around that cooldown and when it's up. And the charm duration isn't really even getting hit like at rank 1. So later on it gets hit. But the duration is going down by just a tiny, tiny amount. So again, I don't see how in pro play, other than maybe throwing off people's timing or something like that for a little bit until they get used to it again, I don't really see how taking her E charm duration down by 0.2 seconds, and that's the maximum it's reduced by when you get all the way into having fully maxed your second ability. I don't know how that would move Ahri, but, you know, whatever. Aphelios, level 1 attack speed 0.64, 0.665, so he's getting more. It's MSI is coming up or something, and that's why they're doing some big changes, especially targeting at pro play. And then Severum, onslaught movement speed 20% to 25%. Yeah, this is also, they're saying Aphelios hasn't made the leap into pro play, although he's doing all right right now. Calibrum, moonshot damage 60 to 160 to 70 to 160. So he's getting a little bit of damage there as well. I don't know why this part's highlighted. They didn't change the bonus AD ratio at all. They're doing some really light changes. I'm worried now for the patch because all three of these changes have been extremely light, and all targeted at pro play. So now what I'm worried is that instead of this being like that big patch I was talking about to shake up the meta in the game, instead I'm fearful that this is a patch that is a tune-up before MSI, where they're just slightly, they don't want to change the meta at all because it would be unfair to change. They've had this issue before with pro play where they feel like if teams qualify for a tournament like Worlds or MSI, and if they change the meta right before the tournament, then that can have its pros and cons. And the main con is that all of the sudden a team that qualified is now no longer good in this meta. And so you've just kind of, like robbed a team that would have been good at this international event from doing that. And you can actually bias the results of the event by patching, like by drastically changing the game in a way that, let's say, favors AD carries. And so now the team with the world's best AD carry has a much better shot at winning MSI, whereas the team that was centered around like their jungler or something like that doesn't have as good of a shot. So they've always had this, kind of difficult thing where it makes the event more interesting if they change the meta, because you're not watching the same champions you were watching before. Teams have to win by adapting to the meta and figuring out what's good and what's not quickly. And I think that's a huge part of what makes a league team good, and kind of what makes the league special is that you can adapt to that change. That's really what makes a good pro player and like have a very long career, is that ability to adapt. So it's also interesting if they do that, but people have complained that it's unfair and that sort of thing. So now I'm worried that we have a big nothing burger patch, even though there's like 20 million champion changes. They're all going to be tiny. Base, pro play, base magic resistance up by 2. R between worlds, 175 to 375 damage. To 175 to 375 damage, 60% AP ratio to 70% AP ratio. So you've got a 10% AP ratio on Aurora's R. That's not a big deal. I mean, it's a nice little buff, but again, they're trying to just ever so slightly move the needle on certain champions for pro play. Zier's no stranger to pro play. Movement speed's down by 5. Attack speed per level is down by 0.5. Bard movement speed. Okay, this is not a pro play change. It says high levels of play. Bard is on the cusp of being viable. So they gave him 5 movement speed. That's okay. That's kind of an interesting change for Bard, I guess. Belveth, our cast range increased. Our Endless Banquet, 275 to 175 to 450. Oh, that's a big change. So it's much lower early, but then it actually goes much bigger. That's going to be completely different. That's going to feel really weird. So her range on her R is just completely different. And this matches her E attack range. Small quality of life improvements to Belveth. Bug fix casting R no longer locks Belveth out of non-flash summoner spells. Okay. I mean, I think this is a buff, but it's very minor as well. That's why they called it a quality of life change. Garen, okay, so his adjustments last patch were quite successful in opening up a more fighter itemization, because they really nerfed his E crit, but they left him a bit weaker than we anticipated, so we're here to buff him back up. His E's damage will be increased from 100 total AD and above. Okay. So damage is going from 4 to 20 to 4 to 16. So they actually took his flat damage down again. And then he's got 36 to 44% AD ratio. Now it's 36 to 48% AD ratio. So his E's going to be a lot more dependent, a lot less base damage. This is a continuation actually of what they did last patch. His E is getting a lot less base damage and a lot more damage the more AD he has. like they said, this will be a buff after 100 total AD, but before then it's a nerf again, actually. So that really sucks, too, actually, for Garen. And you have to keep in mind that when you make changes like this that are meant to be, this is actually meant to be a buff, by the way, right? When you make changes like this that are power neutral until you get to like 100 AD, you have to think about, and I'm sure that they have, but you have to think about like, okay, well, what time does this actually occur at? Because League's a snowbally game, and as we've talked about before, things that happen early matter more in League than things that happen later. And so let's say you were the same amount weaker for the first 10 minutes of the game, but then you were the same amount stronger to compensate for that from minute 10 to minute 20. Well, actually, that's a huge nerf to the champion, because being weaker in the first 10 minutes is way more important than being that same level but stronger in 10 to 20 minutes. So that's, a huge risk here. If you have to get, 100 AD is not nothing. If you, it is, okay, it is total AD. I was going to say, is it bonus AD, total AD? That makes a big difference, because you can get there with like half an item. So that's not too bad. It's not like he's going to sit, for 10 or 20 minutes or something like that before he gets 100 AD at like, if it was bonus AD, right, it would be like an item and a half before he gets there or something like that. That would be really, really rough. So at least he can get there while he's like, half an item in. So that's not too bad. But yeah, we'll see what happens with this one. Not a huge fan of what they did to Garen. I think they could have just left him alone, to be honest. Gwen, like starting last patch, Gwen base health is going from 620 to 600. Yeah, Gwen's pretty strong, but I don't think that she's like crazy strong. Certainly not compared to where she used to be. W, Hallowed Mist, 22 to 18 second cooldown to 24 to 18 second cooldown. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. I think these are like kind of appropriate little nerfs because she is a pretty strong champion, and these aren't major nerfs or anything like that, so that's kind of okay. Jack's passive attack speed increased. So he gets bonus attack speed per stack, 3.5 to 11% based on level, to 5 to 12.5% based on level. So he gets a little bit more bonus attack speed, but this isn't very much and not that big of a deal. Callista, base health decreased, Q cooldown increased. This is definitely a pro play thing. So Callista is actually like one of the strongest laning AD carries in the game. She's barely played in solo queue. There's just not a lot of people who like playing the champion. And so she has a very small, very niche player base. But in pro play, people know that if Callista is ever good, she is like the best champion in lane. And she is like really, really hard to deal with when she's good. And so she's kind of a pro jail champion where Riot's really careful to make sure that she doesn't take over events. There have been, I think it was probably a Worlds, but there have been many important events where she's been like 100% presence, which means 100% pick or ban. 100% presence in champion select. That's really, they're trying to avoid that here. So obviously you probably haven't seen Callista in a while in solo queue, but boom, minus 20 health and an extra second cooldown on her Q just to be sure she doesn't show up at MSI or, she's limited. LeBlanc, E damage increased, R cooldown decreased. Yeah, I mean, I assume they just want to see Faker on LeBlanc or something like that for viewership numbers. So we got, the Faker buffs here. They always like to throw a few buffs towards Ryze or LeBlanc before certain events. It's strange. I don't even know what's going on with that anymore, actually. So I don't even know if he qualified. But regardless, 80 to 240 to 80 to 240, and then 80% AP to 85%. So she gets a 5% increase to her AP ratio on her E. Not a huge deal. Again, they're going very, very light. They don't want to change too much. Cooldown 50 to 30 seconds to 45 to 25 seconds. So 5 seconds off her R at all ranks. That's kind of nice as well. And then Lee Sin, E cooldown decreased, slow amount decreased. So his E cooldown is going from 9 to 8 seconds, but the slow amount is going from 20 to 80% to 35 to 75%. Oh, well, it says the slow amount's decreased, but actually it's increased early. And so it's only decreased at rank 5. So this is actually a nice little buff to Lee Sin, because you get the cooldown a little bit lower on the E, and then the slow amount for most of the time is actually much lower, and then of course you're maxing Q, so it doesn't become less of a slow until much later on. So that's just nice for Lee for sure. This is another champion, sometimes like LeBlanc, these kind of early game aggressive champions that sometimes they actually do like to see, because it's exciting and people like to see Nidalee, Lee Sin, LeBlanc, these very sinful champions, as Ellis would put it. But for some reason they don't like the Callista. I don't know. Okay, Mordekaiser, Q damage increased. 0 to 45 based on level, 0 to 45, plus 80 to 200, 80 to 220, and then the AP ratio is staying the same. So it's not doing anything rank 1, and then it's going up by 5, 10, 15, 20. So he's getting a nice little damage increase to his Q. So that's pretty nice for Mordekaiser. Nico, Q and W damage decreased. So Nico's Q is going from 80 to 260 to 60 to 260. So she's losing a little bit of damage on her Q early. But she's also getting 50% AP ratio to 60% AP ratio on her Q. So she's getting plus 10% on the AP ratio. So her Q will do more later on. And, as she maxes it and gets more ability power in the game, but it'll do a lot less, early at low ranks. And this is also important. They're talking about support. I think this is a fair point, right? Nico's obviously, if anything, she's a very niche champion, but if anything, I would say that she's predominantly played in support. And if they want to move her back out of support, doing something like this is kind of smart, because support isn't going to get as much of the benefit from AP ratios, as other roles would. But they are going to really feel base damage hits, especially in early points and that sort of thing. And then W, Shapeshifter, bonus magic damage is going from 40 to 180 to 30 to 170. So that's also losing 10 damage flat. Which again, probably not going to be that big of a deal for mid lane, a little bit worse for support since you need all the base damage you can get. Whereas mid lane's, it is the same damage nerf to mid lane or whatever, but you'd be, making up for it by having a little bit more ability power in other areas. Nidalee, E Cougar form damage increased. While Nidalee has appeared in pro play more often lately, it's often been due to her strength as a top laner. We want some of her power back and the ability to become an AP jungle threat. They miss Nidalee. People like to see it. I don't know. E swipe damage in Cougar form from 70 to 250 to 70 to 250, 70% bonus AD to 70% bonus AD, but 40% AP to 55% AP. So it's getting a 15% AP ratio increase. That's pretty decent. So that's a nice little buff to Nidalee. Rammus, all abilities adjusted. In this patch, we're giving Rammus an update with 3 main goals. We'd like to retain him as an anti-auto attack tank, but within that umbrella, allow him to be successful when taking magic damage auto attacks as well, with the hope that he can be picked outside of last pick against full AD team comps. Second, we'd like to punch up a few of his abilities, giving him more impactful power balls and soaring slams by front-loading more of those abilities. Third, we'd like to remove some needless complexity. Some needless complexity from Rammus. Are they serious? Some needless complexity from the champion that required exact ability sequencing that simply had a right answer with no room for finesse. Oh, they're talking about like how you're supposed to deactivate your W so that you can like move. Anyways, it's probably a good idea. We'll see. Apparently, Rammus was too hard for low elo players to play because they're self-slowing themselves when they don't know how to turn off W. Oh boy. Okay, so let's see what we got. Base stats, base armor 40 to 35. So he's losing a little bit of base armor. His armor growth is going down as well, 5.5 to 4.5. I think that this is okay. I know that this sounds crazy because you're going to say, well, armor is like one of the most important things on Rammus because we just talked about how his whole thing is like he's anti-auto attack, right? But the thing is that on Rammus, the items that you want to build, like Thornmail, probably heavily over-index you on armor compared to HP. And so by taking away some of your armor there, you're actually on a better balanced curve. So it's not that bad. It's not the end of the world. Level 1 attack speed is actually going up a little bit, which should help with his clear. That's really important on jungle. Base attack damage going from 55 to 65. That's kind of a big deal because he actually does a lot of damage when he has Thornmail and W active and stuff like that and gets a taunt on you. So when he's sitting there hitting you and he has an extra 10 damage in auto attack, I mean, this is quite a big increase to his base AD. He could also potentially, it could even open him up to some other shenanigans items and things like that. I'm thinking about, like, it's probably not that good. Don't try this, but I'm thinking about, like, you know, can Rammus look at, like, Overlord's Blood Mail or other things? Like, I don't know. Probably not. It doesn't actually synergize with the fact that he has 10 more AD. I'm just wondering, like, how would AD Rammus feel about this? Probably pretty good. Passive Spiked Shell. Removed, Rammus's basic attacks no longer gain 10 plus 10% armor increased by 50% during W magic damage on hit. Wow. Okay, so a lot of this is that they compensated by removing this. Okay, but Rammus now gains 15% of his total armor and magic resist as bonus AD. So it adds his armor and his magic resist together, and then he gets 15% of that. It's bonus AD. So let's say that he has like 200 armor and 100 magic resist. He has 300, so he gets 15 times 3. He gets 45 bonus AD. So his passive just gives him, like, I mean, if he had that much, his passive just gives him AD. So he gets 45 AD. Interesting. I wonder about this too because now this was like a lot of magic damage on hit. And I kind of wonder about, like, you know, is he going to be more mixed damage now? Like, does his W and his E and that sort of thing, or I guess his E doesn't really do damage, right? But, like, does his W still do a bunch of magic damage? Thornmail obviously still does magic damage. But now he's doing less magic damage and more of a mix between physical and magic. I wonder how that changes things for his damage. Q Powerball, damage 80 to 200 to 80 to 240. So he's getting more damage on his Q though. Powerball no longer locks Rammus out of casting his E for 0.375 seconds after colliding with an enemy. See, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing because, like, you do knock them back a little bit, just ever so slightly. You do CC them with Q. And so you don't want to taunt them, like, instantly. You know, so I wonder if this duration of 0.375, like, made it so that you had to wait and they had time to flash, or whether it, like, activated right when your QCC were off so that you could, like, chain CC them without having to think about it. Because if that's the case, if this made it so that you just didn't waste your E duration on top of your Q, then this could actually be kind of annoying, especially for low-ranked players who might have benefited from that and not wasting their CC by overlapping it with his Q. But I don't know. I mean, this is a very short duration of time. I don't know that it really depends on whether this amount of time allows for the opponent to flash or not after they get hit by your Q. If they get hit by your Q and you can't taunt them until they flash, then that's a problem. but I wouldn't imagine that would be the case. I think that, I think that you can always taunt them. People don't play a lot of Rammus at my rank, so it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure that you can taunt them without them flashing away. So W, defensive ball curl. So here's going to be a lot of changes because this is obviously the ability people struggle to use. The duration is going from 6 to 7 seconds, but you're probably not using the full duration, or like hopefully somebody's not just hitting you for the full 7 seconds while you have Rammus W up. A duration on basic attack. W's duration is no longer increased on basic attacks. Okay. I don't even think I remember that was a thing. Didn't even know that. Bonus armor 40 to 27 plus 35 to 75% of total armor to 30 to 60% of total armor. So he's losing bonus armor on his W, and he's also losing even more bonus armor on his W based on his total armor. So he's got less base armor, less scaling armor. His W is giving him less armor. Bonus magic resistance. 10 plus 30 to 50% to 27 plus 30 to 60%. So this is the big change. So now he's actually getting as much bonus magic resistance from his W. Oh no, he's not. Wait. Yeah, he is. He's getting as much bonus magic resistance from his W, at least assuming he has the same amount of magic resistance as he has armor, as he is armor. So he's getting the same amount of resistance against magic damage. So are they, they kind of talked about this. Are they trying to make it so that Rammus can be built versus like whatever, just as a generic tank? He doesn't have to be only against AD. Reflected damage was 15 plus 15% of total armor. Now it's 15 plus 10% of total armor plus 10% of total magic resistance. And this is nice because obviously together this is 20% instead of 15%. So this could actually be more reflected damage. And then Rammus's W now properly reflects damage from Dragon's basic attacks. Same for Thornmail. Oh, they're talking about the actual dragon. I was like, Rammus W now properly reflects damage from Dragon. Same for Thornmail. Okay, so I guess when Rammus was doing Dragon before, he was not doing all this bonus damage to Dragon from his Thornmail. It wasn't applying to it, and his W wasn't applying to it, and they fixed that. So now he should be a lot better at doing Dragon. So that's pretty nice. Tooltip improvements. W's tooltip more clearly states how much armor and MR will be gained from the ability, and the tooltip is no longer blank when the ability is active and will now show the amount of damage returned. E, frenzying taunt. Attack speed. E no longer provides Rammus with 20 to 40% bonus attack speed. Damage to monsters. E now deals 80 to 160 plus 70% AP to monsters on cast. This ability does not deal damage to champions. So this is also going to help his clear speed quite a bit. But he no longer gets bonus attack speed. It's such a massive set of changes. It's really hard to take it all in, but we'll go through his ult and then we'll give it a try. He's losing a lot of armor. He's losing a lot of damage and attack speed. So his auto attacks do way less damage, and you use those a lot because when you taunt somebody and they're just sitting there, you just, he does his little thwack on you. And it does a lot of damage because it's his auto attack damage and his W damage and the Thornmail damage while you're hitting him. And it packed quite a punch, but now not so much because he doesn't have nearly as much AD. He's not getting attack speed from his taunt. And I think they reduced his W damage as well, right? So his damage is way, way, way down. But on the bright side, the champion's more versatile. And if you were like a Rammus one trick or something like that and wanted to play him all the time because you like his Q, for example, and that sort of gank play style, then that's really nice because now Rammus isn't shoehorned into being an anti AD or an anti auto attack champion only. He's totally, can do well against magic damage with his W. So he's more versatile in that regard. But they're also being very cautious, so they're taking lots of things away from him, not just in his auto attack damage, but all over the place. And I see them do this quite a bit, actually. They're taking a huge amount away from him in other areas as well. Like how his W's duration is no longer increased on basic attacks. And things like that. And so I just feel like or like the base armor and the all this stuff. He's losing a lot. He's losing a lot of tankiness, and he's losing a lot of tankiness against physical damage, and he's losing all that auto attack damage and attack speed. So it's really hard to say what's going to happen. Maybe the other things that they did and him being more versatile against magic makes him so much of a better champion overall that he just ends up being fine. Maybe he's such a decent champion, especially in lower ranks, and easy to play champion that, people just get interested in him again and he does fine. Because I don't think that the champion was terrible or anything like that, to be honest, especially in like low elo solo queue or whatever. I think he's quite a good champion for low elo solo queue. So maybe the champion ends up performing like pretty well regardless, or they're worried about him performing well regardless, and so they wanted to compensate. They can always buff him back up if they nerf too much. Let's see what they did to his ult. So his ult cooldown is going from 90 to 120 to 90. That's kind of a big deal because this is obviously 30 seconds on your ult rank 1 is pretty significant increase to your ult cooldown. Initial damage is going from 100 to 250 to 150 to 350. AP ratio is staying the same, so a little bit more damage. Epicenter damage, R no longer deals 50% bonus damage at the center of the impact, so he's also losing damage there. Aftershock damage removed, R no longer deals 20 to 40 plus 10% AP damage on aftershocks. Slow 15 to 20 per stack. Now up to 60 to 80%. Now 30 to 50% no longer stacks. So he's also potentially losing some slow on his ult as well. Rammus can now powerball soar even if Rammus is on top of an enemy, if Soaring Slam is cast quickly enough. Okay. Quality of life improvements. Retimed R's animation to play the full animation over the dash. Bug fix. R no longer breaks its animation and fails to deliver Powerball if they are cast too quickly together. Fixed a bug where R's animation bugged out at short ranges. Again, like they hit his ult quite a lot with the cooldown, and I don't see where they compensated by buffing him. Like the slow's worse, the aftershock damage is gone, the epicenter damage is gone. Like there's some quality of life things that, I don't know enough about Rammus's gameplay to know whether these are such a big deal or like whether you can play around these issues or not. But I mean, it's pretty sweeping. So I don't know. Honestly, I don't think that this makes Rammus that much better. I feel like they were really cautious with this, and so they nerfed a lot of extra little things or removed a lot of things from his kit to simplify, but it ends up being like potentially power negative. think if you just throw Rammus into any random game, so if you're a Rammus one trick and you're always picking it no matter what, it's nice that you are more versatile against magic. But in games where Rammus was good before, because he was super good against a bunch of attack damage champions, he's much, much weaker now. And so while he's better generically, if you've killed where he's actually good and viable, then he could just be bad in general instead of being bad but good in certain situations, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of worried about Rammus actually being kind of bad after this, after reading it. But, you know, you never know. We'll see. Rumble Q damage decreased, E slow decreased. Rumble Q flame split. Oh, it is flame split. I'm so confused. Is it not flame spitter? It's been flame splitter the whole time? I'm so confused. Okay, let's see. Rumble Q flame splitter. Total magic damage 60 to 180 plus 110% AP to 60 to 180 plus 110% AP. And then he had 6% to 10% of the target's maximum HP to 6 to 8% of the target's maximum HP. So he's losing a little bit of maximum HP as he puts more points into his Q. Rumble's been the front runner alongside Gwen in top lane as of late. Where? In like pro play? I guess in pro play. Not in my solo queue games. Are we playing the same game? It must be pro play they're talking about. Electro Harpoon. So his E slow 15 to 35% to 10 to 30%. So he's losing 5% flat on the slow at all ranks. Enhanced slow 22.5% to 52.5% to 15 to 45%. So he's losing a little bit more than 5 there. He's losing 7.5 at all ranks, it looks like, on the enhanced slow. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty decent nerf to the champion. It's nothing crazy, but it's a pretty decent nerf to Rumble. Especially considering if this is like pro play targeted or something, we can probably see over here where it says, see, nerfs to Rumble. Yeah, it was pro play targeted. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but what sucks about that, right, is that like when you target Rumble's Q, which is like his most important ability, and his E as well at the same time, like if Rumble's not doing particularly well in solo queue, and I'm not saying he's terrible, but if he's not doing particularly well in solo queue, I certainly don't see him, then in order to hit him in pro play like this, you're now making him extremely weak in solo queue, or like maybe not extremely weak, but like not good. So I guess Rumble just has to deal with that. Rumble players just have to deal with that for a little while in solo queue. It's MSI. What can you do? Samira passive bonus movement speed increased. Q damage increased. Style bonus movement speed per stack 2 to 3.5% to 2.75 to 3.5%. So she gets a little bit more early. And then maximum stacks, or like with, is it with less stacks, not early. And then max stacks 12 to 21%. Maybe this is later. I don't know whether this is talking about stacks or... No, this is per stack. So this would be like based on level or something. From 12 to 21 to 16.5 to 21. So it looks like at earlier levels, Samira gets a lot more movement speed per stack. Q Flare. Damage is going from 0 to 20 to 5 to 25. And then it's got a 95% to 125% AD ratio, and that's staying the same. So she's getting a little bit of extra damage on her Q. Okay. Senna, soul drop chance per minion kill decreased. As it turns out, the biggest buff ADC Senna received back in 1510 was players collectively building static Shiv. Now that players are doing that, she no longer needs many of the ADC specific buffs from last month, so we're bringing her ADC specific buffs back down to see how the dust settles with this new tuning. That's great, because I was starting to ban Senna again as a Braum player because of this, so glad to see Senna hit. She seemed like she was doing really, really well, and good riddance. Soul drop chance per minion kill, 14% to 10%. I don't think that's a complete reversal of where it was at, though. I think the buff was bigger than that. That being said, it's still a significant reduction, and that should help bring her more in line. So that's fine. Shen has been really, really strong since they buffed him. E bonus health ratio decreased. Shen is one of the strongest top laners in the game, if not the strongest. Let's see if they acknowledge that that's because they buffed him like crazy. And ultimately, well, we believe it's good if he's one of the better picks because he creates unique and interesting circumstances relative to other top laners. That is so wrong. I hate to tell you, but if we're talking about like pro play or high elo in general, yes, Shen ult is a different ability. It's interesting. It's a global. It changes the game. But do you know how it changes the game? The way that it actually changes the game at a high level is it encourages more passivity and boring gameplay and doing nothing is what it does. Because the way you play around Shen is once Shen gets level 6, no more all-inning bot lane. That's the way that you play against Shen. And that really sucks. It really sucks. It's not fun to watch if you're watching pro play or a competitive thing. It's not fun for solo queue or high elo solo queue. Frankly, even in low elo solo queue where you're just fighting anyways because you don't even realize there's a Shen on the other team, Shen ulting their AD carry and then you just losing a 2v2 that you were winning out of the blue because Shen showed up also sucks because you just want to win 2v2 and fight, and it's like another version of like, their jungler getting to gank or something like that. It just sucks. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think Shen ult is a super cool ability. He's a guardian champion like Braum. I kind of like the champion and all that myself. He's kind of a go-to top lane champion for me if I have to play top lane because he's a very supportive top laner. I know there are people who love the champion. I understand. Expetu, we see you out there. That being said, I have to tell you, Shen is one of these champions that is like, he's not like a Yumi level or anything like that, but he is one of the annoying champions in League of Legends. I have to tell you that. The way that he impacts gameplay is annoying, okay? And that it is what it is. Somebody had to say it, and they overbuffed him, and then they're talking about him being the strongest top laner in the game. And of course, they just don't mention that the reason why that happened is because they just overbuffed him out of nowhere for no reason. Okay, E, Shadow Dash, 60 to 160 to 60 to 160, plus 15% bonus HP to 11% bonus HP. This is not enough to take Shen out of where he is. I know it sounds kind of significant, but his E is not the reason why. The reason why he's broken right now is not because of his E damage. Now they are hitting Grasp. I think in this patch was their Dragon Otacon and Grasp. So maybe if they nerf Grasp heavily, that could also in conjunction with this help bring him more in line. But I don't think this is enough because they didn't come anywhere close to reverting the buffs that they made to him initially that made him broken and in this spot in the first place. You should take a look at his patch history. Talia, I'm sure they have. I'm just bantering. Base magic resist 30 to 28. I've been seeing this a lot lately. Somebody at Riot has an obsession with -2 armor or -2 magic resist. I don't know why, but they really like it. Okay, -2 magic resist. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's interesting. There was a guy who must have worked at the balance team years ago. There was a guy who he hated when the numbers were like 0.314 or whatever. He would always change it to like, reasonable numbers. Like, I don't know if you know this, but when you're tuning the radio or like the music volume or whatever, there are people I have to admit, I'm like this a little bit. They can't just turn the volume until it sounds right. They have to look at the number, and if the number is not even, like if it's an odd number, if it's like 33, can't leave the volume at 33. The volume has to be at a minimum on an even number like 32 or 34, and then, they're like, "Oh, it has to be 35 or 40 or something like that." It's, it is what it is. But there was a guy who must have worked on the balance team years ago who was like, his whole thing, he didn't care at all. Now, I don't know what he was doing. I'm sure he was doing other things, and maybe it was the team collectively, but he was like, he did not care at all about balancing any champions or anything. The guy was literally just looking at the numbers for every champion, and he was like, okay, this says 0.136. We're going to change that to 0.15. And it didn't even matter if it was like actually kind of a buff or a nerf. It was like, we just need to make these numbers reasonable. And he was just going through, and he was hitting every ratio, every decimal in the game, and he was just rounding like a madman. You wouldn't believe it. Okay, so -2 magic resist and empowered Q damage from Talia, 190% to 180%. Yeah, that makes sense. Talia's been doing pretty decently, and these aren't super heavy nerfs, so that's kind of fine. Twisted Fate, E bonus attack speed increased, R cooldown decreased. So his bonus attack speed on his E is going from 10 to 50% to 15 to 55%. So that's an extra 5% attack speed all the time. That's kind of nice. R Destiny is going from 180 second cooldown to 120 to 160 to 100. That is 20 seconds off at every single rank. That is massive for a Twisted Fate. That's a really big buff. We talk about this all the time. Abilities that you're actually using or trying to use on cooldown when it comes to ults. Twisted Fate is a champion that is looking to use his ult on cooldown to make a play happen. And on top of that, we're not talking about we're not talking about like 5 seconds off. We're talking about 20 seconds off every single time. This is going to mean that you're going to get like an extra ult or two per game on Twisted Fate, which is huge and game changing because of that. And more opportunities, more options, and things like that. This is pretty big. And then on top of that, his E is getting a nice little, it's not anything major on his E, but his E is getting a little bit of attack speed too, so that's also nice. Varus base armor decreased. Hold up, we got a -3 armor this time. Varus' strength in lane combined with his ability to choose between poke and on-hit builds, don't forget about tank Varus, has made him one of the highest presence ADCs in the pro scene. Yeah, I actually kind of agree with this. I think Varus is really, really strong. So that's fine. And I actually think tank Varus in like top lane and stuff is one of the worst defenders, actually, because I don't think that should be viable at all. They need to do something about that, to be honest, even though it's kind of niche. Holy, what was that? Did we just get hit with a thunderstorm? Okay, we're getting hit with lightning, but we will persist. So yeah, I think that what's nice about this is, does it hit? It's armor, but does it hit tank Varus harder? Actually, if anything, I guess it's kind of the same for all of them. If anything, maybe it actually feels worse for AD carry, like poke or on hit, because they're not getting to build health and armor to compensate for having less. So unless you're Dantes and you're going plated steel caps, I guess. Vi, okay, which I actually agree with. I've actually been saying AD carry should build tank for years, by the way. In fact, my friend and I years ago, forget about building tank on AD carry. We just played tanks AD carry. We would play like Sion Maokai and like Cho'Gath Maokai, Cho'Gath Sion, stuff like that in bot lane. I think it works, but people don't want to do that. Vi, let's see. Vi's in an awkward spot right now where her win rate compared to her pro presence are extremely out of line with one another. Yeah, that's part of this disparity can be explained by an unintuitive skill order where it's optimal for Vi to max W second, but people probably don't expect that, right? They expect to max Q and then E. So we're looking to make fairly power neutral changes that bring E max and W max to more similar power levels. So yeah, this is always a tough spot when you have a champion that's like performing poorly in solo queue or like not that great in solo queue, but they're like dominating pro play or something, because it's like, okay, what do we do? You know, do we let like the pro players rot, or do we let the solo queue players rot? You know, so you try to come up with creative changes, and this is a good one. They're actually kind of lucky, right, that they have this situation where like people in solo queue are dumb and maxing the wrong ability, and so we can just change, you know, just buffer E, nerf or W. Now the solo queue players are experiencing, you know, like a higher win rate because they're just happen to be going into the right thing, but we're bringing her power level either neutral or down for pro play. You know, so that was a nice save that happened to be the case. W target max health damage 4 to 10% to 4 to 8%, and then she gets plus. Wait, he's still working there, guys. He's still working there. He found another one. I thought he had retired from Riot because I hadn't seen this in so long. But she had a plus 2.857% bonus AD, and now it's plus 3.5%. So let's see. Let me think about that. This is kind of complicated. Give me a second. So your base amount of target maximum health is going down a little bit, but only at max rank, right? If you're maxing E, then this is just going to stay at 4, and you're actually getting a buff here. So Vi is getting, at least with this part, buffed if you're maxing E second. But if you were maxing W, then there'd be a break-even point where you'd need a certain amount of bonus AD for this higher ratio to make up for losing the 2% here. But you need probably a lot, actually. So it is a nerf to if you were maxing it. And then bonus attack speed 30 to 60% to 30 to 50%, so less bonus attack speed here as well. So the W is kind of nerfed. Then the E is going from 0 to 60 to 10 to 90, so a lot more base damage on the E. And then instead of 120% AD, you get 110% AD. But you actually lose a little bit of the damage here with the AD ratio. So, yeah, I mean, that essentially accomplishes what they were hoping for. I think it's a tiny nerf to Vi, and it makes E better comparatively to W. I actually don't know that this makes it better to max E, though, than W, but maybe it does. But obviously this will achieve what they're trying to do, which is maybe it just a tiny bit brings down Vi's power level overall, which would be for pro play. And then in solo queue where you're maxing E, it's actually a buff if you were maxing E. And so it ends up being nice. So I think that they did a good job walking a fine line here on Vi. Yorick, Mistwalker, bonus attack speed. Although she's still really overperforming in pro play, this is obviously not enough to like knock her down out of pro play. But it doesn't seem like that's what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to preserve the pro play meta, just make some slight adjustments and stuff like that. So they're not trying to take Vi out of pro play, so that makes sense. Mistwalker, bonus attack speed adjusted, Q damage decreased. You know, I think the thing that they changed that's just really unintuitive about Yorick is his minions, the ghouls, last forever. They will follow you to the ends of the earth, and you have to kill them manually because they take so long to go away. It's actually really, really annoying. I would love for them to buff Yorick Q or something like that and revert that change. That change is so annoying to play against. Very, very frustrating. The little minions last like a million years longer than anyone else's little minions in the game. It's just, it feels really weird compared to before too. Mistwalker attack speed 0.5 to 0.5, 100% of Yorick's bonus attack speed to 8 to 80% attack speed. What does that mean? So before it was based on his bonus attack speed. Is this, he's just getting 8 to 80% per level? Or is this like 8 to 80% of his bonus attack speed? But then when, I honestly don't even know what this means. I tried. I would assume this is per level now instead of just based on his bonus attack speed, because it would say, you know, based on, it would say bonus attack speed again if it was 8 to 80% of bonus attack speed. So let me read the blurb. Taking aim at Yorick's late laning phase spike this patch, where he quickly becomes unassailable until eventually falling off a cliff. We're reducing the power of his early spike and lightly returning some of that power into his Mistwalkers very late into the game. So rather than getting all this attack speed based on his bonus early, he's getting attack speed slower over time so he can scale a little bit like better instead of falling off of a cliff and maybe be a little bit weaker early. I still don't really know what they mean by this going from 100% of Yorick's bonus attack speed to 8 to 80% attack speed. I just assume it's per level or something. They just don't say. I'm sure it says on the wiki. Q last rights 30 to 130 to 30 to 110. So he's losing damage on his Q. No change to the AD ratio. Kind of a significant amount. It scales up, so you know it's 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. So that's kind of a significant amount of damage off of his Q as well, I would say. Zeri R damage increased, Chain Lightning damage increased. They got to be careful with this one going to MSI, but I'm sure it won't be too crazy, right? Because Zeri's one of those champions that, like, another kind of pro jail champion, when she was first out and she was popping off in pro play, oh my god, that champion was unstoppable. And then she's just kind of been like weak. I mean, I think she popped back up, but for the most part, you know, for the last couple of years, it seems like she's been weak. And they wanted to keep her weak. So let's see what's going on with this. So R 175 to 375 to 200 to 400. Not that big of a deal. Again, base damage on ult is very deceptive because you'll often get big increases in terms of numbers. But actually, these aren't even that big. It's just 25 at all ranks. But, you know, you're casting your ult so infrequently that if they give you like an extra 100 damage on your ult, oftentimes it's just not that big of a deal because... What the heck? What is that? It's like not a fly. It's like a bee. Jesus. I hope I don't get stung. We got one rune to get through and then I'm done. So, you know, please let me finish. We got, yeah, okay, so I was saying, you know, it can matter for bursting people and stuff like that, but oftentimes damage on your ult's just not as big of a deal as like base damage on your regular abilities because you're using it so infrequently. So that's important to keep in mind. This is also very small. It's only 25. So that's just not that big of a deal. She's also losing, this is going from 100, oh, never mind. Oh, never mind. Okay, let's see. This was going from 85% bonus AD to 100% bonus AD. So there's an extra 15 damage per 100 AD. So she's at like 200. That's like an extra 30 plus a 25 is like an extra like 55. Still, it's not a ton of damage for your ult. It's not that big of a deal. And then 110% AP to 110% AP, that's the same. The Chain Lightning damage is going from 30% AD to 40% AD. That is significant, but it's not like game breaking, I hope, or I don't think it is. But these are some really nice buffs to Zeri for sure. So we'll have to keep an eye on that because obviously she's a very fragile champion where if you go a little bit too hard, the champion can start popping off. I'm not concerned about the increase to her base damage or bonus AD ratio on her ult, but I think the Chain Lightning damage going up by 10% like that, from 30% to 40% is pretty significant. That's really what enables her to pop off and like pentakill your whole team. So if that could end up being a really big buff. I don't know. Rune's Grasp of the Undying, ranged effectiveness 60 to 40%. So this is not hitting Shen at all like we were talking about because it's on ranged champions. We're pretty unhappy when Grasp shows up as a primary feature of range versus melee lane matchups, which is a sentiment strongly echoed by the players of those melee champions. I agree with that. We'd like to send a pretty strong signal that ranged Grasp should not be good, without making it so terrible that the rune does nothing half the time on form swappers. This change represents a 33% nerf to the rune on ranged users, which should pretty clearly push it out of the realm of options for purely ranged champions. Oh, I'm so disappointed. We got baited so hard, by the way. Remember how I was saying at the beginning of the patch that it was going to be like, people went to Riot HQ with all their ideas. Tyler said a big patch was coming. Dantes is saying like they need to make big changes to the game. I'm saying they need to make big changes to the game. Everyone's saying the game's stale. They need to make big changes to the game. So I see the picture on the patch notes and I see 30 champions. I see Dragon. I see Otacon. I'm thinking, oh my God, the whole game's reworked. And then you know what we get? We're retuning Otacon's spawn logic in order to make top lane versus bot lane spawns more equitable. They've done this like 6 times, man, as he currently spawns too often in bot lane relative to top. Dragon. We're fixing a long-standing bug where Dragon attacks were almost basic attacks, but we're missing a few tags. Now they'll behave more like other epic monster attacks and interact with Thornmail, Rammus, and Jax as expected. All Dragon basic attacks now trigger on-hit effects. Thornmail, defensive ball curl, Dragon dodges, all Dragon basic attacks now respect dodge. And that's your patch. Clash. Hold on, why did they bury this below the ARAM changes? ARAM, Brawl, Clash, MSI Cup, position binding in Swift Play Champion Select. Okay, this is what I was talking about. Okay, it sounded like I didn't know what I was talking about Swift Play. Why did they say Swift Play Champion Select? There is no Swift Play Champion Select. I'm not crazy. This is what I thought I was reading when I spent, like, in the last video, I was, like, spending a minute, like, wondering what the hell they were talking about with Swift Play. Swift Play doesn't have Champion Select. Swift Play is you select the champion in your lobby, and then you're instantly into loading screen. Following from normal and ranked queues, position binding has been added to Swift Play for pre-game and in-game consistency with all Summoner Rift position rules. Position binding. That doesn't make any sense, but it's okay. It's fine. There's no champion select to bind positions to. You just get assigned to the position. Unless they mean by position binding, do they mean like getting the support item? But I'm sure that you get the support item if you get support in Swift Play, no? I mean, maybe I don't know because I don't play any Swift Play. But anyways, just sounds weird. ARAM champion swap. Bug fixes. Skins and chromas. So, okay, this one, apparently they saved all their skins for this patch. So you've got Risen Legend Vayne. So that's kind of like the Uzi one. Risen Legend Kaisa. I guess so Uzi's getting like Kaisa and Vayne. And then there's... Is this a different Kaisa skin? But it's... Or is this like an upgrade on this one? I don't really know. But okay, you've got Immortalized Legend Kaisa. And then you've got Ink Shadow, Renekton, Pike, Lee Sin, and Nyla. So all of a sudden, after last patch, all they did was fix up 4 skins that they'd already done. Now you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 skins, including some like probably super high tier skins or something like that. So I don't know what's going on. It just seems strange. Maybe they were just like working on these ones for a long time, like I said, and that's why the skin releases are so inconsistent. I just don't get it. Just release. I'm telling you, like, I mean, you need to look at the internal numbers and do some math on, like, you know, how much we're paying the skin people and how much money we're making per skin and that sort of thing. And you probably need to, you know, test the waters a little bit. And it's a creative process. You're not always going to release exactly the same number of skins, but like, just release more skins per patch and make more money. There's no way that let's say you have 10 people working on the skin team and you release an average of like 5 skins per patch. I think from what I've observed since I started like keeping track of this, that's what I've observed, right? So let's say that you have, it doesn't matter how many people, but let's say you have like 10 people, they're doing 5 skins a patch on average. There's no way that if you go from 10 people to 20 people, that you do 10 skins instead of 5 skins. Yes, you'll make less money on the 5 to 10 or whatever, 6 to 10 than you would on 1 to 5. But there's no way that you don't make enough money to justify having those people hired in the first place to make those skins. Just doesn't make sense. So maybe there's something about it I don't understand, but I'm going to keep saying it basically every patch. There's no way that it makes sense to be releasing like an average of like 4 or 5 skins a patch. They need to hire more people on the skin team. It's how they make money. There's no way that the optimal number of skins to release per patch is an average of like 5. They should just double the skin team and be releasing like 10 per patch, and it's probably more optimal. If they haven't, I'm sure they've done the math, you would think, but they need somebody in there, you know, with a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Michigan, like me, to find their optimal amount of skins to release per patch, because it seems all over the place. You know, last patch, because they fixed 4 skins, they did 0 last patch, which was astounding to me. They've been doing sometimes patches with as little as 3 skins. I've seen like twice in the past couple of months. And then all of a sudden you hit us with like 7, including like 3 super expensive ones. It doesn't make sense. That's all I'll say about that. Luckily, we made it through the patch. It ended up being kind of a nothing burger, so that makes my intro look terrible. It is what it is. Maybe we'll get a big patch next time. With that being said, good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.